between the existing one and further offshore, but the final decision hasn't been taken yet. Well, the basic environmental risks are not different from any offshore platform. The cumulative effect of the three platforms in one area is the issue, and we will work forward to address this issue. So it's a quite positive picture probably, but the question is it enough to protect whales and ensure the conservation of the whales in this particular area and the western grey whale population in general? So our company believes that it's not sufficient. So the reason is, while our cooperation with IUCN and Web is very efficient and positive, and it can serve as an example, as a bridge between the conservation and development needs. Second Energy is the only company that has such independent international scientific reviewing panel, and we think that this instrument is very important for the companies, especially project finance, and should be considered as a best available practice and used in other projects worldwide. So we learned that conservation requires open dialogue, with various stakeholders, with industry, lenders, NGOs, scientists, and others. So today, we need more information about the activities of other operators on Sakhalin Shale, and also about the activities of other industries, and first of all, fishery. Unfortunately, there is a lack of information about the potential impacts on the western grey whales along the migration routes and their breeding grounds, and a lot of gaps in our knowledge about grey whales. So that's why the broad cooperation requires within the range of the grey whales, and of course it can be managed by the industrial companies. So that's why the international-based mechanism for the management is required, and we need to follow up on this. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much. At this point, I maybe wanted just to open for any clarifying questions. We'll take a more broader discussion after this, but I just want to make sure if anyone had any specific questions on the presentation, or something that was unclear or you wondered about, I want to give you an opportunity to ask. Amir, can you go back to the little microphone there so everyone can hear you?
I was just wondering, actually, one of the points that you brought up in the last slide is that you'd like to have more information about the behavior of the whales. What specific information do you think would be useful? And do you think it's actually...
No, I mean, you have to put it on as well. I know it's a challenge.
It was on.
All right, you were just very far away.
I'll try that again. So one of the points that you brought up in your last slide was that it would be interesting or useful to have more information about the whales. What specific information about the behavior that you want to have, and how would that be useful? And how likely is it to get that information in the near future?
Well, after 10 years of broad cooperation and with VGWeb, and after 10 years of the research and monitoring programs, we know pretty a lot about the whales, and we know how to mitigate our risks. So we can deal with the risk of the collision with the grey whales. We know what to do in case of the oil spills, and how to mitigate noise. At the same time, we can do nothing about the cumulative effect, because Sakhalin 2 project is not the only project on Sakhalin Shale, and there are a number of projects. Some of them are running, and some of them are going to fly, and some of them are proposed for the future. And also, this is a region of very extensive fishery. So if we want to assess cumulative effect and address it, we need to know about the operations of other companies and other industries.
We had a question in the back there, and then Randy.
Follow that up.
You'll have your chance.
Just a question about, just wanting to understand, I suppose, the drivers or the motivation for the company to get involved in this project. and how much of the original involvement was based on a regulatory requirement versus a voluntary requirement, and whether that voluntary commitment is an ongoing commitment into the future.
Okay, as our company operates under production sharing agreement with Russian Federation, so we need to follow different requirements. So we need to follow Russian regulation, Russian legislation. We need to follow the international laws, conventions. We need to follow banks' requirement and shareholders' requirement. So specifically for Russian Federation, there is no like a specific regulation how to work, how to deal with environmental monitoring. So the main requirement is to monitor the source of the potential impact and potentially affected zone, but nothing specific about what the program should be, what the monitoring specifically we need. So that gender recommendation. So from the bank's perspective, the requirements are pretty the same, and we had like loan requirements from banks, from our lenders, to ensure that this project doesn't have significant impact on the environment of the Sakhalin Island. So the development of this program, so the basic requirement was you need this program. Well, how to work with this program, it was a mostly voluntary decision of the company about the number of the components of this program, and it was a great help from panel and from other stakeholders about which components required. So both voluntary and mandatory.
Right, any other clarifications on this? Otherwise, I think we'll move over to Randy's presentation. Right, I don't see any other hands, so let's start. Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alexei, for that. And I should say, first of all, that we prepared our presentations entirely independently, and therefore, some of what I will say is a bit duplicative, but that's probably okay because you might not have memorized everything he said. So
there's also some new faces in the room actually that missed the first beginning of the presentation.
Yeah, that's true. So I'll try to, I won't be too long-winded, I hope. One of the things I want to point out too before I start is that Bob Brownell is here, and he was very instrumental in getting the research started on this western gray whale population back in the 1990s, and he's been a member of the various panels, as have I, since we started in 2003. So I'm sure during the discussion Bob will want to weigh in. So I should say too, I'm based in Canada, and I also chair the cetacean specialist group of IUCN.
I think you want to go to the little icon in the lower bar there. You see it there? Yeah, next to the 15%. Further along, to the left. There you go.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. But then how do I advance it?
Probably just down. Click.
Like that?
That's probably backwards. Oh, no,
No, I'm starting with it.
You can only, oh,
yeah, that's
right.
okay.
Okay, then you're fine.
All right. Boy, okay. Yeah, before I start, I just want to mention some of the photographs and some of the information here comes from colleagues. And of course, I appreciate the investment of the panel members over the years who have stuck with this project. And it's been very difficult at times. Obviously, I appreciate the Sakhalin Energy's willingness to continue this panel, and IUCN's staying with it all these years as well. So in this talk, I will cover just sort of 5 general points. One is a little bit more about gray whale history and background, and then summarize the panels, including those before the current panel, give you my take on what some of the positive outcomes have been and what my view is of major ongoing challenges. There'll be a lot of overlap in those as well, but not exactly the same as Alexei's. And then where next, where this thing is likely to be going. The gray whale is a northern hemisphere endemic species. It used to live in the North Atlantic as well as the North Pacific, but it's been gone from the North Atlantic for well over 100 years. Not clear why it disappeared, but probably related to whaling. Since the end of commercial whaling, actually commercial whaling on gray whales ended about 60 or 70 years ago, and since then the population in the eastern North Pacific has made a strong recovery and is back to about 20,000 animals roughly, and we think that's pretty close to what there was before. So they're doing well in the eastern North Pacific. In the west, the recovery has been, as Alexi said, quite slow, although we're encouraged that there are more than 130 animals off Sakhalin, but the story's complicated, as he hinted at, and I'll elaborate on as I talk. So this was the old paradigm, what I would call the old paradigm, and this is the way all of us viewed things before this tagging work took place, really. The red part is what we consider to be, would this be better? I don't know. Anyway, the red part is what we consider the eastern population. This blue hatched area is an area where we knew some gray whales were in parts of that area, but we weren't sure if they were eastern or western gray whales. And then this flesh-colored area all along the coast of East Asia is where we consider to be western gray whales. And this hatched area up here, we know that there are gray whales at least occasionally in the northern Sea of Okhotsk. So that was the way we saw things. We thought they were completely separate, these two groups. And the main areas of interest were, as I say, the pockets here in the Okhotsk Sea where gray whales were historically and are at least occasionally these days. This area, Japan, we knew had been an area of quite a few gray whales in the past. And then this area down in southern China, we knew that gray whales went there, including adult females, in the winter. And we assumed that those migrating past the Korean coast, the ones in the green area here, were headed for southern China for the birthing time and early nursing period for the whales. This is a aerial view just to give you some idea of the landscape of where the work that Alexi was describing and some of the other work by independent groups has taken place. This area here is the mouth of Piltun Lagoon. This is the ocean out here, and this is the lagoon itself back here. And this image down here is of one of the land-based groups of researchers not associated with the oil companies that have been working for more than a decade on this population and providing data for population assessment and other things. So that's a little bit the context in Russia. Because we're here, people might be especially interested in the fact that whaling for large whales, including gray whales, took place 3,000 to 8,000 years ago in at least Korea, near Ulsan. So it goes back a really long time, but this is in the Western Pacific, where basically there are no gray whales now. This image shows you some of the areas where American whalers, all of these black dots are areas where American whalers in the 19th century went looking primarily for bowhead whales and right whales. Over here shows where they found gray whales in the process. And as you can see, there's quite a concentration up here, suggesting that in this area, which we really don't know much about today, is where a lot of gray whales were once upon a time. And there were quite a few over here, according to this, but remember, this is not catch per unit of effort or observations per unit of effort. This is just where we know there were gray whales. But one of the interesting things about these data, to me at least, is this blank area here off Sakhalin Island, which corresponds to this blank area here where the whalers did not go. So, I mean, I assume gray whales were there at that time, and that the current concentration of the remnant population is not a new phenomenon, but we really probably will never know that. In the early 1900s, this is a interesting sort of artifact where gray whales, as Alexi said, were thought to be virtually extinct in Korea and the Western Pacific, thanks to this commercial whaling operation in Korea at the time. Now, this is that kind of really surprising finding in the first year of the satellite tagging that Alexei mentioned, where, much to everyone's surprise, the first gray whale was tracked from Sakhalin for any appreciable length of time, made it basically a beeline straight over to North America, swimming across deep water, which we didn't think gray whales did. We thought they followed coastlines, but obviously this one didn't. So, considering the threats that we are worried about, one is, of course, noise disturbance and the potential for exposure to oil spills as well as collisions or ship strikes. But these two lower images are interesting for two reasons. One, showing that a tangible, real threat to these gray whales is entrapment or entanglement in fishing gear, which might be seen as largely incidental or accidental and unintentional, although there's some question about whether in some parts of Asia, some of the bycatch of large whales is a welcome bonanza by the fishermen, and so you can think of the fishing as partly including the opportunity to catch whales. But anyway, this female down in the bottom left was killed in a set net off the Pacific coast of Japan in 2007. And note the month was January, which is when you would not expect the whales to be in Sakhalin. Of course, they would have been on their way to or in their wintering areas. And this is, I believe, the same animal that was identified as one of the known individuals from Sakhalin. This other photograph is a much more recent one, just less than a year ago. This large female was killed in a fishing gear of some type in China, in Taiwan Strait. So we know that still occasionally gray whales do occur in their historical migratory stream in East Asia, apparently very low numbers, and they certainly are exposed to serious lethal threats there. Okay, so that's a little bit about the background, and now to get on to the panel stuff, as Alexei said, it was in 2003 to 2004 when the potential lenders for the Sakhalin 2 Phase 2 project were looking for some assurance that the company was being mindful and conscientious about the potential impacts of their project on the critically endangered whale population. And at the time, in response to that pressure, I would argue, the company approached IUCN, asked it to convene an independent panel to give that assurance to lenders. And the Business and Biodiversity Program at IUCN set up what they called an independent scientific review panel in summer of 2004. And we started meeting in September of that year. So that first panel, and this was at the time a fairly big deal in IUCN generally, because the idea of IUCN's convening independent review panels for a big business project like this was novel. And so in some ways it was kind of an experiment. Since then, IUCN has convened a number of similar independent panels for much different projects than this one. We had 14 scientists from a number of countries who had a variety of expertise. They had to be nominated by one of the stakeholders, and that included a call for nominations that was made to NGOs, to the oil company, to government agencies, and to scientific professional groups. So they did get quite a range of applications or nominations, I should say, for members of this panel. One of the conditions of being named to the panel was that the person not have any recent association with the oil and gas industry. All the panel members who were selected were under contract to IUCN and report to IUCN so that we were not to be working for or reporting to or being paid directly by the oil and gas companies. Our report was published in February 2005, and as Alexei said, one of the, I think, quite positive outcomes was that the pipeline was rerouted at considerable expense, additional expense to the company, to avoid the feeding area. The panel at that time also established a framework for, I should say Justin Cook did, one of the scientists on the panel, developed a new population model that has been used for this population since then to assess it from year to year or maybe every couple of years, and that's ongoing. The panel, that first ISRP as we call it, also established in a way of independently evaluating the risk factors, and the four that we looked, we identified specifically and analyzed very closely at the time were noise, oil spills, ship strikes, and disturbance to the benthos, because gray whales are benthic feeders. They don't